Welcome back, everybody. This is DA Sports. I'm your host, DASASIN. Thank you. This is episode number 11. I want to thank you all for tuning in. In this episode, we're going to recap my picks from this previous weekend. We're also going to go into my question of the week. And then we're going to finish with the Week 6 Top 5 and Worst 5 NFL rankings. So let's get into it. So for starters, we got to recap my picks from last week. Again, for those new to the show, every week before the Sunday games, I do a set of 5 picks. That's my pick 3, where I pick 3 winners out of games that could go either way. Then I give you my lock of the week, which is my game where I feel the most confident about the winner. And then I give you my underdog pick of the week, which is the team that's favored to lose by more than 3 points that I'm picking to upset and get a win. Now, this week was a good week for me. As you'll see as I go through these picks, I got almost all of them right. And the one that I got wrong, essentially, I couldn't have got right. So more on that in just a second. But to start, we'll get into my pick 3 for NFL week number 6. My picks for this week were Detroit, Atlanta, and Pittsburgh. And I went 3-0. 3-0 this week in my picks. We'll start with the first one, the Detroit Lions against the Dallas Cowboys. As if you remember from last episode, I did say that it was a bad matchup for the Dallas Cowboys. The strength of the Detroit Lions aligns with the weakness of the Dallas Cowboys, which is why I predicted that Detroit should win this game and cover the spread. And they obliterated the Cowboys. The total score was 47-9. You know it's bad when a team is up late and they're trying trick plays. They ran like 2 or 3 plays for their offensive lineman. They ran a hook and ladder to an offensive lineman, and he almost scored if it wasn't for a penalty. So Detroit definitely wanted to rub it in their face. For those that don't remember, Detroit and Dallas played a crucial game last year at the end of the season where Detroit should have won, but they got a touchdown call back at the end of the game because they said that the tackle didn't report eligible, even though he did, and there was video evidence to support that he did. So I think that Detroit took this game personal. They really made it a point to just play smash mouth football. They ran the ball down Dallas's throat, and they didn't let up at any point. They treated the game like it was 0-0 at all times and kept trying to score more and more. The defense was lights out. They made Dak look really bad. I think this was probably Dak's worst game of the season. It's really a daunting look for Dallas. Their schedule doesn't really get any easier. I guess technically it gets easier this week because they have a bye. But outside of that, they're really in the thick of things. They could go on a spiral, which would be terrible. Jerry Jones didn't look very happy about it afterwards. He had to, of course, deal with questions again about is he going to make a coaching change, which he said he wasn't. He's not one to usually make a change mid-season, and I don't necessarily think there's anybody currently on their staff that would make a big difference anyway, so it wouldn't benefit them to fire McCarthy mid-season. Now, at the end of the season, this is his last year on his contract. I really don't see any added benefit to McCarthy being the head coach. I know it's been floated around before and people say that it's not likely, but I do think that they should hire Bill Belichick. I think it's actually a great match in the sense that Belichick is all about discipline and taking care of the fundamentals, which I feel like is something that's been lacking for the Cowboys for a long time now. Belichick also doesn't like talking to the media, and Jerry Jones does, so that would be a good trade-off where Jerry Jones could have the green light to just do all the talking, and Belichick could just sit in the background and be like, I'm just going to focus on coaching. Will it happen? Probably not, but I think that would be best for the Cowboys going forward. But in terms of Detroit definitely looked dominant. They've been pretty much in my top 5 all season, and this is why. If you recall from episode 1, they were also my pick to go to the Super Bowl. So they are definitely looking on the right path. Unfortunately, they did have devastating news. They did lose Aiden Hutchinson for a year. It sucks for them. Also sucks for me because if you remember from episode 1, I also picked Aiden Hutchinson to win the Defensive Player of the Year. And he arguably could have been leading that race. And now he's not going to have the opportunity to get that award. So that sucks. And there's talks about them maybe bringing somebody in. But in reality, there's nobody that's going to replace Aiden Hutchinson. So it sucks for them. But I do think overall their team depth and chemistry and culture will still be strong enough to get them back to the Super Bowl like I predicted in the preseason. But we'll see how it goes. So the next game in my pick 3 was the Atlanta Falcons over the Carolina Panthers. Atlanta did win 38-20. Atlanta this was like one of their most complete games. I think, and I mentioned it last episode, their win against Tampa that came down to the end, I think really put into perspective how good they could actually be. I think it gave Kirk Cousins a lot of confidence, and I could definitely see that roll into this week. Carolina actually came out pretty strong. They were showing themselves to be better than their record is, which is what I also predicted. But the thing that was impressive is that Atlanta then turned it on in the second half and really started to show their dominance and show where they were a much better team. The defense started to fly around more and cause more havoc, and their offense just continued to pound the ball. Algier and Bijan both had a great game, so definitely positive vibes for the Falcons going forward. Not so much for the Carolina Panthers. And then the last game in my pick 3 was the Pittsburgh Steelers to beat the Las Vegas Raiders. And they did that. They won 32-13. Again, just like the other two, they all covered the spread pretty easily. Pittsburgh got back to looking the way that we expected them to look. And the Raiders got back to looking like the way I expected them to look. I think that the team as a whole, in terms of the Raiders, are just really, they're not together as a team. It sucks because I felt like when Pierce took the job that he would really galvanize everybody together. It seemed like he was trying to establish a culture. And I think in a general sense they do have a culture that they're trying to establish, but the problem is that they don't have a quarterback. They went from Gardner Minshew to Aiden O'Connell this week, but I don't think anybody thinks that Aiden O'Connell is a, top 20 quarterback in the league. So it's just a glaring issue that if you don't have a quarterback, you don't have a good team. So there's nothing really you could do about it, and I think that they can expect more of the same probably for the rest of the year. And honestly, they're probably in their best bet would be to just expect to not be good this year, try to get a lot of their young players involved so that, they can tank, so to speak, and look forward to getting one of these quarterbacks that's coming out of college. Because I think there's about 3 or 4 who are better than both of the quarterbacks they currently have on their roster. So, in terms of Pittsburgh, once again, Justin Fields got the job done. He didn't have really gaudy passing numbers. I think part of that was the Raiders' defense. But part of that was just him being smart and realizing that, take what they give me. And if I have to run out of trouble, then do so. And I think there was a lot of plays that he made that Russell Wilson wouldn't have been able to make. And I know that Russell Wilson is healthy now and there's supposed to be, competition considering that Wilson was projected to be the starter at the beginning of the season. I don't think that's going to take place. I think Tomlin is very big on culture and the way things are going. It seems like it'd be best to leave Fields in as long as they keep winning. And that's probably what they'll do going forward. So I went 3-0 in my pick 3 this week. So that brings me to 10-5 on the season in my pick 3. So definitely positive, great record in terms of wins and losses. And I think that now we've got a better idea of what teams look like, that it should be more the same going forward. So looking forward to next week's pick 3. So after my pick 3, we got to get into my lock of the week. Now, my lock of the week has really had bad luck, but we did get the win this week. So I'm 1-0 in my lock of the week this week. Brings me to 2-3 on the season. This week's lock of the week was the Houston Texans beating the New England Patriots. Again, I mentioned it last episode that I thought that even with New England starting Drake May, it wasn't going to be enough to overcome the Texans defense. I think the Texans defense did do good. I think Drake May actually did perform better than I expected, but the Houston Texans offense was actually firing on all cylinders. Even with their number one receiver, Nico Collins, being out, Tank Dell stepped up, really showed his worth, his best performance of the season so far. And CJ Stroud was just on point, picking New England's defense apart. They won 41-21, so not only did they win, they did cover the spread also. It was another dominant performance, the same with the other 3 picks that I made for my pick 3 earlier. Houston definitely has looked like a top-tier contender. If you recall from before the season, I had originally predicted that Houston would finish with the best record in the AFC. They, of course, do not have the best record in the AFC right now, but they do have the second best record, so anything could change, and they're definitely in line to potentially get into that spot by the end of the season. So lastly, we got to get into my underdog pick of the week. Now, I did lose on the underdog pick of the week, bringing me to 0-1 for the week and 2-3 on the season. So, but there's 2 things. Well, to start, for my underdog pick of the week, I did pick the Washington Commanders to beat the Baltimore Ravens. Now, if you recall, for my underdog pick of the week, it has to be a team favored to lose by more than 3 points that wins the game outright. Well, in this week, none of the teams that were favored to lose by more than 3 points won, so it really didn't matter which team I picked. There was no way for the underdog pick of the week to win. And I kind of suggested that that might be the case before this week. I said I didn't really have confidence in it, but this was the team that I felt the most confidence in out of those that were more than 3-point favorites to have a chance at winning. And I think out of the ones that were more than 3-point favorites, they actually played the best. Washington showed, even in a loss, that they deserve to be one of those top 10 teams. They're definitely playing as the best team in their division right now. So even though it was a loss, it was a good test for Jaden Daniels. He looked really good. Baltimore is just really a good team right now. They seem to have found their identity even more so, getting Derrick Henry the ball more. I remember back after week 2, they were saying that they didn't bring Derrick Henry in to give him the ball 25 times a game. But I think since that game, he's been averaging 22 carries a game. So, yeah, maybe he literally meant not 25, but he is getting the ball a lot, and that has definitely led to their success and will probably continue to lead to their success. They do have some more division games coming up that will really test them, but I think Baltimore's definitely got the ball rolling well and should continue to prosper going forward. So, yes, I got my underdog pick of the week wrong, but there was no way for me to get it right. So essentially, it's like I went perfect this week. So I'm not complaining. Definitely a good week for my picks. All right, so next we're going to get into my question of the week. Now, there were a lot of important highlighted games, some that I mentioned that happened this week. And I was looking at the overall standings, and there's a lot of teams that are having disappointing seasons where they are right now does not meet where most people's expectations of them were before the season. So this week's question of the week is, which team has been the most disappointing so far? So I'm going to give you 5 options as normal with my question of the week. I want you guys to respond to me, comment, send me messages. Let me know what you think is the answer for this question of the week. So I'm going to give you my 5 options. At number 1 for most disappointing team, is it the Dallas Cowboys? Dallas Cowboys are coming off a really terrible beatdown to the Detroit Lions. A lot of people picked the Cowboys to win the division this year. I was one of them. It doesn't look like they're on track to do that, and their schedule coming up is really tough, so they definitely fall into that category as most disappointing so far this season. The second option is going to be the New York Jets. Now, the New York Jets had a tough loss on Monday Night Football. They were in it most of the game, going back and forth with the Bills. They just could not execute in the fourth quarter. Missed field goals, a lot of missed opportunities, drop passes, terrible blocking, offensive holding penalties, false start penalties, just a lot of self-destruction, which is indicative of a team that seems to be in a lot of turmoil, which was evident by the fact that they fired their head coach this week. So them being 2-4 is not where most people expected them to be. So they definitely belong to be in this discussion for most disappointing team. The third option is the Cleveland Browns. Now, maybe it was just me, but I thought the Cleveland Browns would be pretty decent. I actually thought that they would make it to the playoffs this year. I don't think that's the case now. They only have one win so far. Deshaun Watson has not looked any better. The defense has looked good in spots, but not good enough to overcome their offense. That combined with Chubb not playing all season, he's supposed to be coming back this week, but it's definitely put them in a hole. So their chances of making the playoffs is really slim, especially considering how tough their division is with every team being above them at this point. So Cleveland definitely deserves to be in this consideration for most disappointing team. The next option is another team in their same division, the Cincinnati Bengals. Now the Bengals are coming off a win, but it was a win against the Giants, and the win wasn't very impressive, and they still only have 2 wins on the season. And again, they're in a very tough division, and Pittsburgh and Baltimore are, I think, 2 games ahead of them. So it's not looking good for them. They put themselves in a deep hole, kind of the same way they do every year, but this year even seems to be more crucial because there's 2 teams in their division that seem to be catching stride. So most people didn't predict them to be 2-4 through 6 games. So they definitely deserve to be in this disappointing group. And the last team in this question is the Los Angeles Rams. Now the Rams are partially here due to injury, but nonetheless, it's about their record. They are another team that most people pick to make the playoffs. I believe I also picked them to make the playoffs. I believe right now they only have 1 win though, and they seem to not be able to get over the hump. They can't close games out, and they claw and claw and claw, but can't get it done. And at the end of the day, it's all about wins and losses. So considering where they were projected to be at this point in the season versus where they actually are, they definitely have to go into the option for most disappointing teams. So your 5 options for most disappointing team are the Dallas Cowboys, the New York Jets, the Cleveland Browns, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Los Angeles Rams. Let me know what you think. All right, so now to finish off the episode, we got to get into my top 5 and worst 5 rankings after NFL week number 6. So again, those new to the list, this is not a projection of where I think they're going to finish at the end of the season. This is solely based on what they've done to this point, who they've beat, who's beaten them, and their overall performance so far this year. So to start, at number 1, we got to stay with the Minnesota Vikings. They are one of 2 teams that are still undefeated, and they had a bye week, so there's no reason to move them anyway. As I mentioned in last week's top 5, they have been the most complete team in terms of offensive and defensive performance. Both sides of the ball have looked impressive in different games, so I'm definitely going to leave them in the number 1 spot for right now. At number 2, we have the Kansas City Chiefs, also another undefeated team, the last of the 2 undefeated teams. And my rule of thumb is that until you lose a game, you can't be passed by anybody who's lost one. And honestly, I would still keep them number 2 just based on play. Their defense, to me, has probably played the best in the league. They've played a really tough schedule, and each team has been held under 28 points, I believe. It might be even less than that, but I think I saw a stat recently that they have the longest streak of any team in the league of not allowing a team to score 28 points. I think it's like 20 something games, which is pretty crazy considering the competition and considering the target on their back, that they're the two-time reigning defending champs. Everybody's coming out to give them their best, and their defense is really young. So the fact that they've been able to do that has been impressive. The offense has dealt with a lot of injuries, and they're trying to get over that. We'll see how that goes going forward. They do have a really tough game this week against San Francisco, which will be really telling as far as where this team lies going forward. At number 3, I got to go with the Detroit Lions. Out of all the teams with any losses, they definitely look the most impressive. In terms of top to bottom, they have explosive players on their defense. They've got a great offensive line. They've got great receiving core and a great running back core and a quarterback that knows where he needs to put the ball at all times. He doesn't get too high or too low. Definitely complements the rest of his team, and they look to be very dominant. And I anticipate that dominance to show itself more and more as the season goes on. At number 4, we got to go with the Houston Texans. I mentioned them earlier. They've definitely been rolling. Their offense looked great this week, even without their number 1 receiver. The defense still been pretty good, flying around. They put a lot of pressure on opposing quarterbacks, and it's a very good complement to the way their offense plays. So they deserve to be in that number 4 spot. And at number 5, we got to go with the Baltimore Ravens. Overall, I haven't liked how the Ravens have finished games before this week. But this week they were able to get a lead and hold on to it. And even though Washington was clawing at the lead, they kept that margin throughout the fourth quarter, unlike some of the games they had earlier where they blew a lead and lost and then almost blew a lead and held on to a win. So Baltimore's definitely got it rolling and deserved to be that number 5 spot in this week's top 5. Now to get into the worst 5. So to start off the worst 5 at 28 is the Cleveland Browns. As I mentioned earlier in the question of the week, Cleveland Browns have not looked good. Deshaun Watson has not looked good. Now the one positive factor, which is why, surprisingly, if you remember the list from last week, they've actually moved up 1 spot. They were competitive in their game against the Eagles, and they do have Nick Chubb coming back this week. So I think they will look a little bit better than how they have looked in previous weeks. They still deserve to be in the bottom 5, but I would put them at 28 for right now. At 29, we got to go with the Tennessee Titans. Now, if you recall, they had won their previous game, and I said that part of the reason why they were in the bottom 5 was because of Will Levis. And part of the reason that I think they won was because Will Levis got hurt and Mason Rudolph finished the game, and they won the game. Well, they went back to Will Levis, and it was more of the same. He's awful. I think they need to move on from him, but not to say that Mason Rudolph is like a world beater or anything like that. I'm sure they really wish they still had Malik Willis, but nonetheless, with Will Levis leading the way, this team does not look good. It sucks because I feel like their defense is getting buried in the sense that nobody really realizes that their defense is actually pretty good. But it's hard to be really good when your offense is terrible. And that's essentially how they've been. Yes, they were in the game with the Colts, but, in terms of competition-wise, the Colts aren't really that great. And I don't see Tennessee getting better throughout the season, mainly because of the quarterback position. So we'll see how it goes from here, but they definitely deserve to be 29 at this point. At number 30, we got to go with the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars, to me, are probably the next team that's likely to have a head coaching change. I don't know if it makes sense for them to do so mid-season, but if there was going to be a team that had a head coaching change mid-season, I feel like they would be the ones that it would happen with. They got destroyed by Chicago in England. They have another game this week in England against the Patriots. I think if they don't win this game this week against New England, they're definitely going to have some changes because when they go to England is usually when they have success, and they didn't last week. So if they have 2 weeks back-to-back where they don't, it's really going to look bad, and they're probably going to have to make some changes. But yeah, so far they deserve to be in the 30th spot. At 31, we got the Miami Dolphins. They had a bye last week, but without Tua being able to play, I haven't seen anything that suggests that they deserve to be above anybody other than the last place team. We'll see how things look this week, but again, their offenses look pretty bad, and I don't think their defense is built to really keep the game close when their offense isn't producing. So right now they remain in that 31 spot. And then in 32, last place, worst team in the league, it's the New England Patriots. Yes, they look better with Drake May playing instead of Jacoby Brissett, but ultimately the strength of their team was their defense, and they gave up 41 points this week, which means if your strength of your team is not looking good, I can't think that you're going to be any good going forward. They have a battle of bottom 5 teams this week against Jacksonville in England. If they can't show any improvement in this game and get a win against Jacksonville, then they're probably going to remain in this 32 spot for the rest of the season. And I guess we'll see what happens. Definitely looking forward to waking up at 6 o'clock here on the West Coast to watch a game between 2 bottom 5 teams. So, but that's it for this week. And I want to thank you guys all for tuning in again. Please make sure you like and subscribe and share with as many people as possible. I appreciate all the love. Look forward to seeing you guys next week. Peace.